Right, lads, let's get into it. I am Mal Foster, and you are just looking. Yes, wit, woo, is all I'm gonna say. Well, that, and you're also listening to the latest episode of Dimed Out, which shows that it's not just a beautiful mug that you've got going for you, you also have a lot happening inside of your skull as well. There's a lot of good stuff swirling around in there, which, unfortunately, cannot be said for some sentient turnips in charge of large infrastructures. But the less we talk about that, the better for everyone, because, yeah, let's just, let's stick to the plan, let's hunker down, and let's pretend that none of that is actually happening. What I do want to talk about before we dig into the delicious meat and tatties of this episode is you and how you're doing. How are you doing? Seriously, just between you and me, how's it going? Are you... yeah? Okay, good, because for a minute, I was slightly concerned. I thought, I didn't want to say anything, but it did cross my mind if you were managing to flatten the curve of sanity, or if, maybe, and you can tell me if you've had a moment, because we all have moments, right? We all have moments where we feel we may have gone past the tipping point, but we're not entirely sure, because we're not entirely sure of much anymore, and, you find yourself questioning if certain things are normal, like, I don't know, just off the top of my head, standing in the corner of the room, just Blair Witching it, screaming at the wallpaper, imagining it as the supermarket delivery boy, and he's not only substituted 2 but 3 of your most desired items on the list, which, by the way, you've had to wait 7 or 8 or even maybe even 9 days for, because you just don't even know anymore. If that has happened, it's okay. We can come back from that. I mean, I'm not saying it has happened to you or to me, no, or anyone, but, things happen. That's all I'm saying. In all seriousness, it's just like suddenly vowels and consonants have failed me. In all seriousness, and I don't know why I just suddenly went like Second World War radio announcer. In all seriousness, Hitler's on the move. In all seriousness, if I can actually get that sentence out, I do want to give a big old shout out and lots of love to anybody working in the supermarket, whether it is actually in store or if you are a delivery boy or person. I don't know why I said delivery boy, that is so derogative. If you are a delivery worker or you are an in-store worker at a supermarket of any shape, size, brand, or affiliation to whatever, if you are working on the front lines in a supermarket in any capacity, I want to give you nothing but love, as we should all be doing, because let's face it, without these souls working right now, not only would we be sinking like a stone in the deep end of crazy, but we would probably, even worse, be taking a page out of Alex Jones's playbook and looking at the best ways to cook and eat our neighbours. And let's be honest, nobody wants that. Well, yeah, okay, maybe there's a couple of people that want that, but let's just let them do them. Let's just, as you were, and let's just, stay away from potential cannibals, which, to be honest, has worked out pretty well for me so far, so I'm just going to stick with that. If you suspect somebody may be the kind of person that would eat you, maybe, I don't know, just really take the whole social distancing thing a few steps further, and no, never speak to them again would probably be my advice, just in case. Anyway, moving swiftly and firmly away from the topic of cannibal awareness, which is not a subject I thought I would be discussing today, or ever, for that matter, really, but hey, I guess that's just how it goes here on Dimed Out. I want to talk about this episode and why this one is a little bit special. It's a little bit special because it features our very first guest, Dan Seraph is a man that I've known for a number of years now. I'm not even going to try and remember how many. He's also somebody that I've had the privilege of calling a friend for a number of years too. We first came into each other's lives digitally, as it were, by writing for the same website, which at the time was called Napier's News, and then it transitioned into Screen Invasion, and both variations of the website dealt primarily with pop culture stuff: film, TV, music, video games, comic book stuff. And at the time, I believe, and I would have to ask him because his memory is probably way better than mine, but then that's not exactly hard. I think we were both writing about film at the time, and somehow, some way, the idea of doing a podcast was pitched, and both of us were interested. So we started doing a podcast for Screen Invasion, and then at some point along the lines, having struck up a friendship and a sort of chemistry on the show, we decided to do a side project called a film club, and we've just kind of sort of had each other in the other's peripheral ever since. So primarily we connected by working for the same website, talking and writing about film. So obviously that takes up a part of the conversation you're about to hear. We talk about what we've been watching, what got him interested in the medium of film as a whole to begin with, what it was like to actually screen films himself, putting on events, how that was, and more stuff film related. But it's not all film related, so don't worry. If you feel like this podcast is becoming just solely about film, then I'm here to reassure you that is not the case. As much as I love it, I don't want it to be completely the central focus of Dimed Out, as you will see in this conversation, because we do shift away from film. We talk about travel, we talk about different cultures, we talk about Dan's experience visiting Japan and what it was like to be an outsider far away from home. All sorts of good stuff coming up. I hope you enjoy this just a smidge the amount that I enjoyed sitting down with Dan. It's always a pleasure to talk to him on or off mic. And yeah, I hope that comes across. I hope you guys get, as I say, even just a smidge of enjoyment that I got sitting down with him. Anyway, without further ado, this is me talking to my good friend, Dan Seraph. Just to give you an idea of what I'm working with here, because I'm in the study / little library / side room we have, and it's stone floors and walls. And so this has been a bit of a nightmare this week, getting logistics sorted. It's a little bit of acoustic slapback, but to stop that, I've actually got a pillow behind the microphone and a pillow to the side. So I've made like a little pillow fortress to dampen the sound. It is absolute
It's
high-tech
like a nice little makeshift studio.
Oh, it is. And the thing is, you can tear it down and reassemble it within like 20 seconds. That's the joy of it.
It's so convenient.
But it's so bizarre. I'm just staring at a pillow like I'm talking to the pillow. Which, who knows, maybe a few more weeks of this, I may actually be doing that.
If it gets you through lockdown.
Yeah. All right. So that's a good point. So how have you actually been doing during all of this?
I mean, it's very bizarre and strange, isn't it? I mean, I sort of occasionally just take a sort of step back and kind of, I guess, take for granted that, like, okay, we're living through a very historic moment right now.
For sure.
Something that people are going to be talking about for decades, centuries to come. Like, it is crazy that we're living through like an unprecedented time in modern history. It is pretty fucking wild, to say the least. I mean, personally, like, I can't complain. Like, I'm lucky enough that I'm still able to work every day. Like, I'm healthy. I don't live by myself, so I have company. So I'm just very fortunate in a lot of ways. I have friends who live by themselves in apartments in city centers who are finding it very claustrophobic at the moment. I have other friends who have, lost work, or I don't know if you do, but I know a few people who have contracted the virus, and thankfully none of them have had any serious issues with it. But
yeah, thank God.
so it's I'm pretty happy with how I am at the moment given the circumstances, but it's a pretty strange time to be alive.
It is, and you kind of touched on something that I talked about in the first episode, talking about how I've sort of experienced this, and yeah, you're in a very similar mindset to me that you do understand. I mean, it's impossible to avoid how weird everything is. Everything's sort of inverted, and it's completely. There's the way that I put it is that the framework of normality is there. We have the people we know and care about. We have things that we're used to. It's just like the picture on the canvas is very different to how we're used to. But you seem to be in a similar mindset to me of acknowledging the fact that you are in a very decent position in comparison to others. And I think that not only is that obviously a privilege that we're both very respectful of, but it also kind of helps, I think, kind of navigate through the weirdness, is knowing that and being conscious of that.
Yeah, 100%. Like, and the other thing is as well, I don't know if this is just sort of facilitated by my like crazy anxiety,
Yeah.
but I've just been incredibly cautious about like
Hmm.
everything since, I mean, probably February. I was kind of like, look, I feel like this is becoming a very serious thing. I'm going to be very careful about where I go, who I come into contact with. Um, what sort of things I do outside of my normal home environment.
Hmm.
And that's just sort of the way I've approached that. And like my whole mentality throughout this whole thing is like, I'm going to treat this as if I have the virus and I don't want to pass it along to anyone else. And just being sort of respectful of other people's, spaces, and, kind of appreciating that people might have underlying health conditions. Um, so I mean, I've very rarely left the house since February for that reason. But I don't know. I've just I've tried to embrace like the few positives that have come with this.
Sure.
I've used the extra time that I have to read more, to watch more, to try and do things that normally I would sort of complain about not having the time to do.
Right.
Taking up, I mean, not as many hobbies as I would like because I'm still working and I don't have like the free time that some people do. But learning to cook better, and kind of honing some of my writing a little bit. So I guess you could sort of take a very and it's very easy to take a very cynical view of everything, given that it's a very anxious and scary time. But I'm trying to make the most of this. I guess see it as much of an opportunity as possible. I don't know how have you been kind of feeling about this?
I've been dealing with it okay for the most part. I have been very, as I say, privileged to have a lot of time to work on stuff, work on creative projects, work on learning things. Like I've just been absorbing documentaries left, right, and center about anything and everything, and it's actually been really, really engaging. Kind of latching on to things that I have an interest in, but things that I didn't particularly know about either. So that's been really quite good to be sort of throwing myself into.
So it's interesting you mentioned the sort of documentary
Hmm.
kind of binge that you've been on, because it's kind of something that I've tried to engage in while I've been around the house a lot more. Do you know the documentary filmmaker Frederick Wiseman?
The name rings a bell.
So he's like he's made like 50 documentaries since
Yikes.
like the 1960s. He's a very prolific dude. Um, and he's really interesting. He's kind of a genre unto himself. His films are always they're kind of concerned with either institutions or places, and
Oh.
his whole approach is that he will just sort of spend a lot of time either in this place or in a particular institution and just
Uh-huh.
kind of set his camera up, just capture everyday life, and just kind of reveal how these particular things tick. So he made a documentary called At Berkeley, for instance, like a couple of years ago,
Okay.
where he kind of spent the full semester at UCB and kind of went to lectures, went to board meetings, went to sort of student marches and protests. And there are no talking heads in any of his films. There are no sort of interviews. It's all kind of fly on the wall cinema
Mm,
verite. Um,
okay.
but like kind of through that, it sort of touches on these sort of themes of sort of the education system and underfunding of education. There's a film of his called in Jackson Heights, where he goes to Jackson Heights in New York, one of the most like kind of diverse cities, one diverse kind of areas in the US, and kind of captures sort of life for people who are immigrants in America and the immigrant experience. Sort of captures sort of pride protests and rallies in the area, and they're all really, really good films, and they're all on Canopy at the moment. So I've just kind of been streaming them, and they're just so good.
So he just kind of immerses himself in certain sections and just kind of absorbs everything that's going on.
Basically, yeah. So, like I said, there's Jackson Heights is really good. Berkeley's really good. There's one called Central Park, which is just set around Central Park, capturing different events and people and eccentric characters around the park, and occasionally sort of going into sort of public kind of I guess like board meetings and things as well, and kind of looking at how they're trying to raise funds to keep the park in operation. He's a really interesting guy, and he always takes the same approach. The one thing that's always been a kind of obstacle for me is that his films are sometimes like insanely long.
Oh, okay.
There's one that I watched the other day called Public Housing, which is set in a kind of public housing estate in Chicago. It's incredible, but it's 3.5 hours. But they are really engrossing, and despite the length, they're actually really accessible and really interesting.
What is it about? It's interesting that you kind of tap into this, because this is something I've thought about a while back, and it's just sort of brought it back to the forefront of my mind. What is it about celebrated documentarians and like really acclaimed documentaries that are just so long in nature? Because I went through Mark Cousins' Story of Film recently, and it really kind of threw me into a deep dive into territories and genres and periods that I either knew a little bit about or nothing at all. And in doing so, and then like digging further and further, you find like top whatever lists, you find recommendations, you find like golden unspoken gems, and then you find like a whole sort of treasure trove of documentarians and documentary films, and they're like ridiculously long, some of them. And I'm just like, okay, this sounds good, but do I have 6.5 hours to invest in this?
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? Like, I mean, I haven't at all thought this through, but I feel like maybe the great thing about documentaries is that they're sort of at the intersection of something being really informative and really entertaining. Like they're sort of within a medium that is, a film that is very digestible and accessible, and is kind of, is made to be mass entertainment. But at the same time, if you find like a really good documentary filmmaker like Mark Cousins or like Frederick Wiseman, who is so sort of able to inform and educate, then it sort of stimulates so much, intellectually and sort of just like viscerally, I guess. Like that's how I feel about documentaries, that you can kind of dive into a really big docudrama, whether it's the story of film, or I'm really keen to watch The Last Dance on Netflix, the Michael Jordan series.
Yeah, you need to. So like, even if you have no interest in basketball or sports, this is the thing. It's one of those things that transcends interests. And obviously, if you do have an interest in the subject of basketball or sports, or basketball in that particular time period, yeah, you're going to love it for that reason and so much more. But it's one of those things that I think actually the less you know about it, like a lot of great docs, the less you know about the subject, the more you're probably going to really sort of latch on to it, because you're discovering so much for the first time.
Yeah, I've heard wonderful things about it, and I have to say I'm not really a sports fan at all. It's one of the things I just haven't inherited from my parents, who are huge sports fans. I have never really had much of an interest. My dad used to take me to Liverpool games, and I would just be like, I'm so bored. But
that's
I
like
think there's
sacrilege.
Something about
That's sacrilege to my ears, Dan.
But yeah, there's something that just seems very compelling about The Last Dance, and what I've heard about it, and the sort of what was happening in basketball and within that team, and with those people at that time, that I think I'm really just gonna love. So I'm very excited to watch that. I kind of have a bit of a weird relationship with Netflix's kind of docu-series, and I tend to kind of find them a little bit over celebrated, but I feel like this is going to be the one that is the exception to that.
Do you find a lot of them to have been overrated over the years?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I watched Making a Murderer and thought it was fine. It sounds like a very horrible thing to say about what is clearly a very important film.
It's probably the worst criticism that series has received, to be fair. So I think you're okay. I don't think you're gonna. I think you're gonna knock its Rotten Tomato score down any.
No. And then I guess there have been a few other things that I've watched over the years, but I think the kind of final straw for me was the what was it called? I feel like it was called Don't Fuck with Cats.
Yes. Yeah, it was, I think.
Which was sort of the like quintessential Netflix documentary that everybody was raving about. And then I watched it and I was like, this is trash.
This is the thing, because I didn't watch it because honestly I had zero interest in it. But if I remember rightly, it's to do with the web sleuths who were looking into. There's a dude who was posting awful like animal torture videos or something, and it was like a bunch of like amateur web sleuths who sort of compiled their information and resources and basically caught him.
Yeah, that's essentially the story. Yeah. I mean, that's essentially the story. But yeah, it was so, I don't know, it was so sensationalized, and I kind of, it's very graphic as a series, and I just found it kind of tasteless. But then I know I know enough about your taste to know that you could appreciate just how much this annoyed me. But after kind of suffering through about 4 or 5 hours of the series, at the end, within the like last 10 minutes of the series, it tries to make this point that like, you know, the people who have watched the people who have watched the series are as much a part of the problem as the people who committed these crimes, because you're also engaging with this sick, twisted, like disgusting content. So
I think I vaguely remember you tweeting or something about this being like the most repugnant 10 minutes that you've seen in I think even you may put it in quotations, recent cinematic history.
I don't think there
like
were any quotations involved.
It was it was something along them lines. I'd completely forgot about that. But yeah, I remember seeing that, and I was already distancing myself from watching it. I was like, yeah, okay, that's just pushed me
there
further
was
away.
just like it was just something about having sat through 5 hours of a documentary that was, you know, showing these kind of really twisted kind of images and sort of sensationalizing the story, and you know, kind of engrossing you in this sort of horrible world, and then in the last 10 minutes being like, but you're as much to blame for watching it as these guys are for what they did. And I was like, well, don't fucking make the documentary if you feel this way. Like, if you feel like we're part of the problem for watching this stuff, don't show it to people.
Is this Netflix's version of the Hanukkah remote control sequence?
Yes, it is
Funny Games.
100% that, and that's why I remember you hating that, and I knew when I kind of brought it up that you would feel the same way about this.
Do you know what's funny is for years I've hated that sequence. I've hated that film. But watching the story of film again, and that comes up at one point, and I'm watching it, and I'm like, in my head, and maybe this is just the framing of an older person, I don't know, but I'm just in my head, I'm like, did I misjudge this? This isn't actually as bad as I thought it was.
No,
and then I'm like,
I remember defending it when we talked about the film years ago, and I watched it again maybe 2 or 3 years ago and was like, you know what, I think Mal had a point. No, it's not good. I know I feel like the story of film, from what I remember, makes quite a strong case for it, but it's bad. It's not good.
Yeah, it did make me ponder whether I should go back and rewatch Funny Games, but I'm still on the fence with it.
Hard no. I'm really glad that you did watch the story of film though, because
me too.
I think it's. I mean, as a kind of documentary, I know that it's kind of amateurishly. That doesn't sound like a word. It's not very well put together. I mean, if you sort of, some of the talking head interviews are like really poorly shot, and there's this whole like recurring motif of a bauble, which is like kind of out there.
Yeah, Mark loves his bauble, his Hollywood bauble.
The bauble.
It's constantly
Hollywood.
This is I've never heard anyone do a Mark Cousins impression, but
I've been trying to nail that for years. I've still not got it.
This is the thing. I think it's something I would definitely recommend for people as a whole, especially if you do have an interest in cinema. But it's a very Marmite approach. I think some people will either really latch on to his sort of slough-like delivery, or other people just be like, this is way too slow. What?
I
Why is this
kind
man
of
being so
find it
lyrical?
I find it endearing.
Oh, I do too. I love it.
I
I'm
do.
definitely on board with it, but
I like his voice. I think there's something kind of hypnotizing about it, which I think adds to the experience. But I think even just, it's rough around the edges, but he has such a knowledge of what he's talking about.
Oh, for sure.
That I think just inherently makes it compelling. And I don't know if anyone else could have narrated it or made that film other than him for all its faults. And I came away with such a long list of things that I
Oh, dude, it's ridiculous. So I made a list, an ongoing list, and then for like about a week after, I just sort of splintered off in looking at different things and made like a mega list of sorts, taking stuff that was in my IMDb list for the longest time, and ended up with something that's like 568 films long. And this is like real speaking to just the nerdiness behind me. I put it all in chronological order with in the app for notes on your phone, you can do the little check thing. I've literally got them all in that. So as I go through, I can tick them off.
That's brilliant. I need to do that. I think it's somewhere in my notes from years and years ago. I'll be able to find it, but I literally just wrote them down as they popped up on screen. So they're not in any particular order. And I can't even find it when I'm scrolling through, but I must have had 200 films that I wrote down, especially from the earlier episodes when it's sort of looking at kind of older Japanese movies and sort of older Indian movies too. Like, he makes like a really interesting case for sort of older Indian movies being sort of one of the fundamental kind of influences on Hollywood.
I think out of everything that I took from the series, the thing that I really, really liked the most and appreciated him including was just the scope and looking at films from different countries like Chile and Mexico and India, because it's films that, I'll be honest, I've never heard of and probably wouldn't have unless I'd encountered it randomly somewhere along the line. And it just kind of shows that outside of the sort of mega structure of Hollywood that has sort of fluctuated and changed shape throughout the years, there's been so much innovation and so many interesting ideas. And granted, not all of them work, but it's interesting ideas and people taking chances at different places across the world.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that seems to be like the thesis of the whole movie, that the kind of history of film is racist by omission, I think, is something that he says early on. And like, you kind of see, and he builds like a really good argument over the course of the movie, that what we think of as like some of the most influential films in movie history actually kind of borrowed those influences from things that we don't remember or have never really been archived or kind of studied or have been part of textbooks in film academia. It's kind of amazing to sort of see some of the innovations that have long been sort of attributed to Hollywood films kind of working their way back into like foreign films. I know that, like, I guess The Birth of a Nation is always sort of seen as like this kind of landmark film in editing and cinematography, and as much as it's a very racist film, sort of still kind of held up as an example of like, this was like the start of filmmaking as we know it. But it's really interesting that he finds kind of, I feel like there's like Swedish films and even films made by women that sort of came before this that we don't talk about. So yeah, if anyone that does have an interest in film history, like, I'm always sort of like, you should check this out, because it's Marmite in how it's delivered, but there is like such a good amount of interesting content that's worth listening to and worth watching.
On the topic of film, I wanted to kind of get into what drew you to it as an art form at first. Like, do you remember at any point seeing something in particular or just having an experience with a particular film that just kind of made you go, okay, this is for me? I don't know what it is, or maybe you did know what it was, but something just clicked and you were just like, okay, this is for me. I want to know more.
Yeah, so I guess the context a little bit is that both of my parents are huge cinephiles.
Okay, that helps.
And like, yeah, which really, really does help. And so like, Whereas most kids were probably brought up on, you know, Toy Story and Disney animations, I remember watching like The Godfather at a very young age.
Nice.
Like, I think I must have been in very early high school when my parents were like, right, we're watching Once Upon a Time in America. It's 4 hours. Sit here and like enjoy it. But I was like too young really at that age to sort of like, it's not that I didn't like them. It's just that I sort of kind of took them for granted and just appreciated that this was sort of, I don't know, this was like a quality that was to be expected, and never really kind of thought through, or never really wanted to kind of investigate too much more into kind of the history of films or how films are made. But for some reason, like I think this must have been about 2006. There was a film that I'd seen advertised, which for some reason, whether it's poster or the trailer, just kind of grabbed my attention. It was Pan's Labyrinth. And I'd never really watched any foreign films before. It's not something that would normally kind of I would pick out, but something about the marketing or advertising just really kind of resonated with me. And I was like, I've got to see this movie. This looks really, really cool. And I remember going to see it and being like, oh, like this is what movies are. Like it can be like such a kind of, you know, visual and auditory experience, the amazing music, and you can get incredible costumes and settings and cinematography, and all of this can work in tandem. And sort of at that point I sort of started researching more into how movies were made, and kind of I wanted to find out the films that inspired it, and look back through the history of the sort of horror and fantasy genre and work my way back to things influenced Pan's Labyrinth. I think just sort of by osmosis, after watching all these films, I sort of began to get an appreciation of how it works. I mean, it's a bit of a tough question to answer, really, because I've always kind of wondered, like, what is it that has always responded about movies to me? And like the best answer I've only ever really been able to give is that I think it's one of the few kind of pieces of like media and content that just like appeals to the broadest possible kind of demographic. Like movies can appeal to like the dumbest person in a room and the smartest people in a room. And I think that's something that I really like, that like they can be so entertaining and so enjoyable, but then you can also peel back the surfaces and see this incredible amount of artistry that goes into them. It's something that can be, you know, diverting and make you laugh and sort of heighten your emotions for 90 minutes, can be made with such a level of craftsmanship and dedication. And I think that just kind of has always kind of fascinated me about them. And it's why I love knowing about cinematographers and movements of film, what inspired different sort of eras of movie making. That's as good as an answer I could possibly give to sort of articulate something that's really difficult to
totally. And I fully appreciate it. Kind of put you in a bit of a hot spot there, because it's something that you would maybe want a little bit of time to sort of articulate more of
no, it's never something I've just ever really been able to sort of wrestle with. For some reason, it's just been something, whether it's, you know, through just sort of a bit of obsession, or whether it's because I was sort of raised on it, that I've always just had a real appreciation for it.
I mean, you had a good jumping off point. If any film is going to really kind of get you interested in sort of one, the mechanics, and as you say, the craftsmanship of a film, is Pan's Labyrinth, but also just the sort of duality of that film, in the sense that it's framed as like a sort of almost fairy tale, but yet it has so much darker underlayers to it, and you know, the political and social class structures aspect to that film. It's a really dense film that I think, I know it's appreciated and a lot of people love that film, but I sometimes think people kind of overlook just how much is actually in that film.
Yeah, I think it's a very special film, a very important film. And I agree with you that like anyone you speak to about Pan's Labyrinth seems to agree that it's great, but it never appears in sort of, you know, those Sight and Sound sort of 100 best film lists. And I do think it probably deserves to be there.
Oh, for sure.
You definitely tapped into something that like I think is one of the things that really appealed to me about it was, you know, when I discovered it like 15 years old, I wasn't super like aware of sort of movies being metaphorical or having subtext or themes, but that was something that really stood out with Pan's Labyrinth. I was like, oh, okay, so this is a fairy tale, but it's also about fascism, and it's about the sort of social and political change in Spain, and this is kind of reflected through the characters and how it's made, and I was like, and the story of this girl sort of losing her innocence is sort of, kind of an allegory. I was like, oh right, okay, so this is what stories can do. I think it just really kind of clicked and sort of made me appreciate like what art really is.
That's the other thing is it is in a lot of ways a sort of coming of age story, but just kind of messed up.
Just very dark one.
Yeah, exactly. So last year, to kind of segue as smoothly as I can, you did some film screenings, right?
I did, yeah, I did.
How did that come about, and how was the experience?
So I just, this is a little bit of background for people who are listening that may like don't know anything about me, but so I live just outside of Liverpool, and I used to work in Manchester. Manchester had such a good scene of sort of rep screenings and classic film screenings. It seemed to be like every week at a point that you could go to a cinema in Manchester and see some great sort of independent or classic or foreign language film, but that wasn't really the case in Liverpool. And I kind of thought, if no one else is doing it, maybe I should try, and sort of bring these films to audiences that are a bit closer to where I live and in my city. So I tried to figure it out, and a lot of people were very helpful and kind of pointed me in the right direction. So the first one I did was a screening of Spirited Away, the Studio Ghibli Hayao Miyazaki movie.
Nice.
Which I kind of chose A, because it's a great movie, and B, because it's a very popular movie. And I thought, if I'm going to do this, I want people to actually come.
Yeah, sure.
So I thought this is kind of a crowd pleaser. And the first that first experience, I micromanaged the shit out of absolutely everything, to the point where I think I pissed off projectionists and kind of wound up distributors. I was trying to make sure that the print was in the right place that it should be. I wanted to make sure everything started on time. And it went incredibly well. We sold out the screening. I did an introduction beforehand. We gave out some brochures. Got some really good feedback from it. It was fantastic. So I did a series of screenings after that, where I kind of did a season of the best films of the decade, and showed Under the Skin, Moonlight. What were the other two? Then it was The Wind Rises, again a Studio Ghibli movie. And after the first experience, I thought, I'm just going to kind of take a step back, because it went so well. I didn't need to micromanage everything. Like, I was getting a little bit too obsessive. Like, clearly these are capable people. I'll just kind of, do what I need to and let the professionals do their job. Which, I mean, I feel like I'm now going to be very disrespectful to some people, but I don't mean to be. Like, a lot of people did kind of do a very good job, but I should have micromanaged because they definitely didn't go as well as they could have done. We had issues with the projection for The Wind Rises, which started early and we had to stop the film. There was problems with the sound and Under the Skin. It was definitely kind of a lesson. I think, being very new to this, there are a lot of things you don't realize, and some of the work that goes into projection and sort of the organization of these kind of events is something that I hadn't really appreciated. But for the most part, they did go well. And the one thing I'll say is they were always really well attended. And I think it was really kind of heartwarming to see that these films from, not only just like several years ago, but going as far back as like 2001 for Spirited Away, still found an audience. And kind of, people were still willing to kind of, in this era of kind of Netflix and streaming and, all of Ghibli movies are now online, people were still willing to go out and see them on a big screen, which was kind of, it gave me a little bit of hope for cinema.
Yeah, I was going to say, as a cinephile, like that must have been obviously, from a personal standpoint, having put so much time and effort, and this being a project of yours from the ground up, and like your baby, essentially, having seen so many people turn out for Spirited Away, that must have been one very personally satisfying. The fact that you'd put this thing in motion, you took a chance on it, you'd put it into action, and it had paid off. That must have been very personally satisfying. But just also from some from the perspective of somebody who just loves film, seeing, as you say, people still turning out to see this must have been just as, if not more, sort of satisfying for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't remember exactly how many people turned up to Spirited Away. I think it was 300 and something, and we sold out the second biggest screen in the center of the main multiplex in the heart of Liverpool. And there was literally not a seat left. There were people who turned up slightly late and couldn't sit together. It was that busy. So, that was something I was really, really proud of from an organizational point of view. But also, like you said, that like we did have like an incredible audience for that. It was, absolutely silent when I stood up to kind of do a little bit of an introduction beforehand and give some context to the film. There were quite a lot of young kids in the crowd that I hadn't really noticed come in when I was sort of, at the door kind of welcoming people, all of whom were like so engaged in the film and really responded to it. So, I would like to think that, maybe the experience I had with Pan's Labyrinth is something that was recreated with people watching Spirited Away for the first time.
Oh, that's an awesome thing to think of. Yeah, because that's the thing. As you say, it's a crowd pleaser, and a lot of people come to see it will come to see it because they know the film and they love the film. But you've got to just fully realize there's people in that audience that have never seen it before, that maybe have come because someone they know is like, oh, you should see it, it's great, or just come on a whim. And so here you are providing the opportunity for them to see this for the first time and hopefully love it as much as they should, because it is just a magnificent piece of cinema. And then hopefully opening the door to, as you said, with Pan's Labyrinth, digging backwards, looking at inspirations, looking at things from the same studio, looking at comparisons and what have you. So that in itself must have been a pretty great feeling to have.
Yeah, it was. It was something I'm really kind of proud of pulling off, especially the Spirited Away ones. The other ones weren't without problems, and they could have gone smoother. We did have issues, but it's all a learning curve. I definitely want to carry on doing that once it's safe for people to go back to cinemas, whenever that may be, and in whatever context that might be. So if you are around the sort of Liverpool, Manchester area and you are interested in sort of independent classic films, or anyone is, then you should come check it out, because we do try and put quite a bit of thought into these events and make sure that as good as they can be.
So I want to talk about something slightly different. I'm not somebody that usually gets jealous over anything, but I did get insanely envious when I saw that you got to go to Japan not so long ago. Because that is a number one slot on the bucket list for traveling. It's somewhere that I wanted to and tried to get to a few years ago, but just ran out of money, so that didn't happen. But yeah, how was that? I mean, obviously amazing, but
yeah, it was absolutely incredible. So I have wanted to go there since I was a teenager. As someone who kind of grew up not only on movies but on anime, and it's always like kind of always had a real love for sort of Japanese culture and cinema and kind of Japanese art. It was something that was always kind of a bucket list thing, that one day I'm going to go to Japan. But I think there's a weird thing with when you sort of put things on a bucket list, that you sort of feel like it's something that you have to sort of, it's something you have to attain. It's like a hard thing to sort of to actualize or to realize. But actually, like, it sort of came to a point where it's like, it's not that hard. I could just book a flight ticket and book a hotel and then I can go. I sort of built it up to this monumental thing because it was something I wanted to do for so long, and then it sort of dawned on me one day, like, it's it's not any different from going anywhere else. Maybe I should just cut some costs here and there and save some pennies and do what I can to afford it. But there's nothing stopping me from going, so I just, like, myself and my partner just one day were like, should we just go? Like, yeah. And we sort of like went on the website, kind of put in our details, got to the kind of booking stage, and we were like, are we doing this? Should we? Like, yeah, I guess so. And that was that. So then, yeah, we went around the kind of cherry blossom season in 2018, I think it would have been. And it's just such an incredible place. It's the best place I've ever been to, and it was just such a unique experience. I mean, everything that I will say about it is just such a cliche, and it's probably been said like
Go ahead, go for it.
millions of times before. But it is genuinely just such an eccentric but kind and friendly and inviting and unusual place that is just like unlike anything else I'd ever experienced. Um, and yeah, I mean, I would wholeheartedly recommend it. There are obviously certain sort of cultural barriers between
Yeah.
yourself in America and myself in the UK that are unusual to adjust to. Customs that you maybe have to learn, and things that you, such as bowing, that become a little bit of something you're unfamiliar with, and it seems a bit strange at first, but I think it's part of the appeal and part of the charm.
Sure, it's different. It's an alternative to what you know, and you're kind of going into somewhere where this has already been steeped in its tradition and heritage for years. So, the best thing that you can do is not fight it because it's unusual or it's different. Is to just sort of go with it
Yeah.
and immerse yourself into it.
I feel like I mean, people obviously travel for different reasons. For me, I think I've always just wanted to experience different ways of life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think going to somewhere like Japan is just like such a sort of overload of that.
Yeah.
That it really is quite like amazing. There's so many different things to learn, different things to see, different things to taste that you would never normally experience anything like around you or anywhere close to you.
Mm-hmm.
So it was phenomenal. I think the highlight of it, and something I would recommend if anyone goes, is you can go to the hotel bar from Lost in Translation completely for free. It's in a hotel like any other bar.
Yeah.
You only have to pay for drinks if you want. Like, you can just go and enjoy the view. And I guess something you don't really see in Lost in Translation is that you just get this beautiful view of Mount Fuji from the hotel bar.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember it was like maybe the penultimate night we were in Tokyo, and we just went up around sunset, just got a beer. They were playing like incredible music. I think they were playing Chromatics and all these great sort of indie pop bands. You just got to watch the sunset over Mount Fuji, and I was like, God, this is great. Like, this is up there with like the great moments of my life.
I was gonna say, did you feel at that point like this is where I peak?
Yeah, it was 100% sort of like, I don't know why I'm going to do anything after this.
We just stay in a loop of this forever, and I'll be perfectly happy.
Yeah, it was definitely, things have gone downhill from there.
That's incredible. So did you spend most of your time in Tokyo, or did you sort of move from one place to another?
We moved from one place to another. I mean, I guess the unfortunate thing about working is that there's only so much time that you can
Sure.
sort of take off. So we had 2 weeks to travel as much of Japan as we possibly could. So we spent a couple of nights in Tokyo. I think we were there from like Thursday to Sunday, and then traveled to Kyoto. Went to a place called Nara, which is kind of famous for having, it's kind of cool. They have basically kind of built this village, this town, around what was historically kind of woodland area where wild deer would just roam, but rather than doing what most places would do and sort of push out the wildlife and the animal life, they've just sort of embraced it as part of the town. So deers will wander around like they're just any other citizen in the town and just hang out. They just cross over crosswalks and like walk down the sidewalk. It's a really strange place, but in very kind of typical Japanese style. It's very in touch with and very appreciative of nature and wildlife. So that was kind of a cool place to visit. And we went to a place called Nikko, and then ended up back in Tokyo for a couple of nights. I would like to spend more time in Tokyo if I go back, because I hadn't appreciated just how big and how much stuff there is to do there.
Yeah.
With a limited amount of time, we did most of the kind of traditional tourist things. Went to temples, went to the Lost in Translation bar. I went to the Studio Ghibli Museum. But yeah, there is so much stuff to do and so many like unusual kind of kind of underground cultures to experience that we never even touched upon.
So it's interesting you touch on temples, which are very much ingrained in a sort of very ancient and root part of Japanese heritage and culture. It's very different to what a lot of people may immediately think of Japan of being like bustling metropolis with neon lights everywhere. It's stripped down. How was that in terms of just visiting somewhere of a more, I guess, spiritually pure essence
Yeah, I
than
mean,
big parts of somewhere like Tokyo?
that's the best way of putting it, really. That it was kind of amazing to step into a lot of these temples in the middle of bustling cities
Mm.
and experience something that was very kind of calm and serene. Um, and like anything in a place like Japan, there are sort of, I guess, sort of new sort of parts of the culture that you have to like kind of learn and appreciate. There's certain customs with kind of washing your hands and washing your mouth before you enter temples. There's kind of a way that you pray before you go in, which I would just kind of respectfully would stand back and watch people do it first and kind of learn what the right way was and then do it. So we weren't doing anything that was insensitive or offensive. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it was such a kind of culture shock to go from one extreme to the other. And I mean, just kind of, I kind of like them just architecturally because they're just such beautiful buildings and have, you know, such kind of vibrant colors and kind of wonderful sort of smells of sort of, you know, incense and things when you kind of go in them, which is just, yeah, so far removed from the kind of metropolis life around them.
I think it's really good that they're still very much a part of their culture, though. I mean, you look at that country as being a sum of all of its parts, really. The country that was obviously like fractured massively
Mm.
post-war, and yet they've managed to rebuild themselves and develop, for lack of a better term, a sort of futuristic mindset in terms of like aesthetics, architecture, general culture, and yeah, there's a lot of weird shit in Japan,
Yeah,
but
it's a place of extremes for sure.
yeah, but they've kind of managed to sort of adopt a sort of much larger foresight than other places. Yet at the same time, they've never lost touch of the roots and the sort of, as I say, the things that are steeped very much within their heritage from before the war. And you don't. It's it's unusual to see a country that kind of manages to balance two sort of separate time periods and identities and yet merge them into a whole. So that must have been
Yeah,
kind of
it's
interesting, as you say, to see the contrast between that.
yeah, there is definitely a kind of dichotomy between how in touch with very ancient past it is and how in touch with very distant future it is.
Hmm.
It's both an incredibly technically innovative place with sort of a very sort of futurist aesthetic in a lot of ways, but then you can go to certain parts that, you know, really do embrace sort of the Shinto Buddhist traditions of the past. It's cool, and I would wholeheartedly recommend going if you get the chance. It's not as unattainable as as I thought it would
Right,
be.
and that's nice to know because it's always been like a pipe dream that I think I have put on sort of a pedestal as just being like, yeah, I'd love to, but it's never going to happen, is it? And it can.
It's so easy. Just book a flight, find a cheap hotel. They're all good. It's not as expensive as you would think. It's very affordable.
Did you stay in one of the capsule hotels when you were there?
No, we didn't. We
Any reason? Wow, that was a quick answer. I take it that was just something you purposely wanted to avoid.
extreme claustrophobia.
Yeah.
We stayed in a pretty traditional hotel when we were in Tokyo, but
Mhm.
we stayed in they call them Ryokans, the sort of these kind of very traditional sort of Japanese bed and breakfast kind of guest houses with kind of bamboo floors and kind of they have this sort of sliding doors and things. That was quite a lovely experience, really.
Yeah.
It's an insanely friendly place where the one we stayed at had dogs running around, and we were just made such a fuss over because we were like these white Westerners in kind of a rather obscure area of Tokyo, of Kyoto.
How did you find that actually as coming in as a Caucasian tourist? Because
So this was really interesting as a kind
yeah.
of something I hadn't experienced before because most of the traveling we'd done before this was in the Western world. We'd been to America and been across Europe, where obviously as a Caucasian person, I was always been in the majority, whereas we were traveling to parts of Japan where we were very much a minority. And so, I mean, we were just made to feel very, very special and very welcome most of the time,
well,
because
good.
we were obviously very different from the kind of people that some would normally meet. You find this is kind of a strange observation, but we definitely noticed ourselves being kind of looked at more and sort of becoming kind of more self-conscious of ourselves, because we're obviously stood out in a way that you, I guess, it's not normally the case in such a kind of, it's not a very diverse place kind of historically. We never felt that in any kind of intimidating kind of way, and we never stood out in any sort of it was never any kind of hostile or negative way. It was just we sort of noticed that people would definitely look at us and be like, "Oh, white tourists."
Yeah, that's got to be slightly alienating and unusual, to say the least.
Yeah, it was kind of eye-opening. It makes me realize that that's the
Yeah,
way that a lot of people kind of feel maybe every day. So it sounds like a very simple observation that would be quite obvious, but it never quite dawned on me how it would feel every day to sort of know that you look different from the majority of people.
But that's the thing, I think, and this really applies to so many areas. It's not until you actually put into an experience, and particularly somebody else's experience, that is foreign to you, in the actual sense of foreign, that you can appreciate what that would be like, because you've never had cause to, I suppose, until you've been put in that situation. So yeah, I can totally see how that would be very sort of eye-opening and sort of make you contemplate a perspective that you maybe hadn't done before.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've heard various accounts. I've heard of people that have been before and found that they were made a fuss over and sort of just treated extremely well, and kind of had almost attention lavished on them, in the
Yeah,
most
that's
Japanese reserved way possible. But they could tell that they were like a nice bright spark to somebody's day, because it's this outsider who's bringing in a different flavor to their day-to-day life. And then I've also heard accounts of people who've been on like public transport and just been pointed at and had the word gaijin just yelled at them,
oh
which
my god.
must have been very, very strange.
That sounds very strange. No, we never had that. It's always the former with us. We were definitely made a fuss over. The two examples that I can sort of kind of use as kind of concrete instances were when we stayed in that Ryokan. The owner was just like so kind of endeared by these kind of two strange white Westerners in her place that she like gave us gifts when we left.
Oh,
These kind of little like kind of cat kind of sundial things that we've put around our house, which was incredibly lovely of her. And the other instance was my girlfriend has a tattoo on her wrist, and we hadn't really realized this until we got there, but it's actually kind of frowned upon to have tattoos in Japan. It's historically been seen as sort of like a sign that you're in the Yakuza. So obviously they appreciate that someone coming from Europe is not going to be part of a kind of inner city gangland. But obviously it's sort of like it's a strange and alien thing for particularly sort of older generations of Japanese people to see. So there was like an old woman who really made a fuss over my girlfriend with this tattoo, and was just like really kind of amazed by this very simple Harry Potter English she had on her wrist, and was asking about the meaning behind it and when she got it done and what was it like. And it was it was really cute. It was such a
that's awesome. Yeah, I can understand from the perspective that a lot of people maybe sort of really wigged out by such sort of cultural divisions and differences. And as you say, the customs that you've adhered to when you're there, and that you just see being practiced by people who just have it as part of their day-to-day lives. But I think it's definitely, from my experiences of traveling, is just taking what you see and just rolling with it. Because as I say, if you fight it or you resist it or you're just really cynical about it, like, oh god, I'm not doing that, then you're probably not going to enjoy yourself half as much.
Yeah, exactly. Like I try to explain certain like cultural differences to my parents who are kind of like, "That's just strange. It's weird." And it's kind of like, well, it's just the way of life. Like you either choose to sort of ignore it and maybe come across as ignorant or insensitive, or just embrace it and enjoy it. And you sort of realize that, things might be different, but, it's all just part of the same sort of universal customs, really, of just kind of, being respectful and trying to be kind and sensitive to other people and other people's kind of cultures.
Exactly. It's exactly how I feel. I do have a couple of questions, and I'm going to pose these to everyone. It's just quick fire sort of things, just
Ooh, okay.
things that come to your mind without even thinking about it too much. All right. So the first thing is, if you had to pick something that you find overrated, what would that be?
If I had to pick something that I find overrated, what would it be? Marvel movies.
Oh, okay, Scorsese. Fair enough. Any reason, or do you want to just leave it at that?
They're like consistently 3-star movies. And every time a new one comes out and I see critics kind of saying it's the best one yet, I'm kind of like, really? Because it's probably going to be another 7 out of 10.
I'm kind of with you for the most part on that. But I will say that when the last one, the last Avengers film, I can't even remember the name of it because they just pumped them out.
Endgame.
Yeah, that's the one. When that came out, that was a lot more enjoyable than others, I think, because it built to a climax, and for the most part, because of the audience.
I wish I saw it with a crowd. I feel like it would have been a
Yeah,
really good time with a crowd. I kind of
yeah.
like the sort of smaller scale, kind of more throwaway ones. My favorite's weirdly Ant-Man and the Wasp. I love that movie.
I haven't
That's
seen
the
that.
only Marvel movie which I kind of think goes above the sort of average mark.
All right, so the flip side of that is something that you find underrated.
Okay. I want to kind of steer away from the movie topic because I feel like
Okay.
that's an easy one for me. So something I
It can be
find
anything.
underrated.
It can be a vegetable that you particularly love, or maybe you're
I was
missing because of
actually
lockdown.
I was
I don't
actually
know.
trying to think of food. You know what I really find underrated? I really miss just getting like a really cheap, like kind of bowl of like fast food ramen or something just after, like, I don't know, like we have like sort of like takeaway places around like Liverpool where you can just kind of go and get like a poutine or whatever after you've been out for a few drinks. And it's like a really good ramen place, which I always took for granted because it was like £3 and it was like not that good. But like, man, I'm craving it so much at the moment. So like just kind of cheap comfort food that you can just get when you're sort of had a few drinks is something I'm really missing at the moment. Maybe fast food is my underrated thing.
Okay, all right, yeah. I think that's very applicable right now for sure. All right, and last question. And again, just right off the top of your head, if you could deliver a message to yourself 5 years in the past, what would it be?
Oh, I mean, I feel like at this moment it would just kind of be to like go out and do more stuff because it's not going to be that's something you can do forever. There's times when I sort of put off social plans, or sort of skip films I wanted to see at the cinema, or I wanted to see a show and just thought, I don't know if I can afford it right now. Like, I'm going to make the most of those opportunities when I come out of lockdown. So if I give myself some advice, it would be just go and do those things. Don't be such a skinflint with your money. Don't be so lazy.
I think that's a pretty solid piece of advice to give to 5-year-old past self. That's good. All right. Well, I mean, this has been awesome talking with you. I mean, it's been a while, and this is one of the things that I really wanted this show to be for me personally, not just a case of having people on that I know I'm going to get good material from and good conversations from, but just having the ability to talk with people that I haven't spoke to for a while, or in some cases I've never actually spoke to ever. So I've got a few people on the list that I've known for years, but I've never actually had a proper conversation with. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, it's been great having you on.
It's been such a pleasure, and I've really enjoyed doing
Awesome.
this.
Anytime you want to come back, I will always have you on. It's always a good time chatting with
I
you.
will absolutely take you up on that.
Awesome. So there you go. That was my conversation with Dan Seraph. Good dude, really good dude, good people. As I said at the top of the show, always a pleasure talking to that man on or off microphone. Always have a lot of time for Dan. Hopefully you've enjoyed that. Hopefully you've managed to take something from that, whether it be a recommendation or whether it just be taking in the insights of somebody else. And that's one of the things that I would like this show to be over time, is a sort of mirror to other people's observations and experiences. And the more guests we have on the show, the more that's likely to happen. You may have also noticed, I mean, it was kind of hard to at some points, the use of incidental music on this episode. That's something that I want to sort of pour more into forthcoming episodes. Incidental music, transitions, a little bit of music to break up the chat, a little bit of music to underpin certain things. And most of the music that you've heard on this episode, I have actually made myself. And I think this is a good sort of vehicle to continue doing that. I have for many years, some of you may know, some of you may not, have dabbled with music. I've dabbled with a bit of hip-hop, a bit of trip-hop, ambient stuff, electronic stuff, all kinds of things. And it's always just been more from a hobby standpoint. I've never ever considered myself a musician or talented in that field whatsoever, but it's just something I've enjoyed, kind of like doodling. I'm not very good at it. I'm not very good at drawing, but I do like to do it. It fulfills me creatively, and it's just, I don't know, it's just kind of fun to do. So yeah, moving forward, there's going to be more incidental music, more random bits of audio taken from here, there, and everywhere, and just more of an audio presence to not only break up the conversations, but just add a little bit of spice and flavor to the show, I guess. You know, music has always been an important thing for me, and I think if this show is going to be reflective of me, then it just has to have some music. It just has to. Music has been a huge part of my identity for as long as I can remember, that it would just be wrong not to include music of all genres, all shapes, all interests, and just throw it into the show. But it's not just stuff that I am making myself or sourcing from other spots, sampling. I want to open the doors to people. If you are a musician of either a serious, seasoned veteran status, or you are just a casual Johnny come along and press this, press that, put that together hobbyist who does it for fun like me, then it doesn't matter. All range of experience, all range of genres, all range of styles, all range of interest and ability are open. I'm looking for music. If you've got music, if you've got some tunes, if you've got some straight fire bangers, if you've got some jams for me, bro, if you've got a bop and you think it's going to fit the show, then let me know. Get in touch. We can sort of arrange, I don't know, some kind of musical mutual agreement. You know, you give me your work and I can promote yours. You know, it's a dual back scratching kind of deal that we could have going on here. You know, everyone likes having their back scratched, right? I like it, you like it, let's scratch each other's backs. That's all I'm saying. Doesn't have to get weird. Can do if you really want it to, but it doesn't have to. The point I'm trying to get to eventually is this. I now have ways for you to get in touch with me. So if you have music that you would like to contribute to the show that you think would be a good fit, if you just are working on something that fits, if you just want to jam on like a Disney keyboard and circuit bend it and add some breakbeats to it, I know I'm not telling you what to make. I'm not giving you directions or cues or ideas. Whatever you've got, if you think it's going to fit, if you think it's going to work, if you want to have some of your work put on a little platform and I can shine a light on it, get in touch. Or even if you just want to get in touch in general with whatever, if you've got questions, if you've got comments, if you've got suggestions, topic ideas for future episodes, things to explore, then you can get in touch as well. You can get in touch via a number of channels. You can find the Facebook group on Facebook, oddly enough. Just search for Dimed Out Pod. In fact, if you go to facebook.com/Dimed Out Pod, you can go straight there, and that would save you a bit of time and a bit of hassle. Do that. Facebook.com/Dimed Out Pod. If Twitter is your thing, and it may very well be, then you can find me over there at I am Mal Foster. That is at I am Mal Foster, because that is who I am. So yeah, if you've got some music that you want to throw my way, if you've got some topic suggestions, some recommendations, some requests, as if I'm like a hospital DJ, then yeah, by all means. Or even if you just want to swing by and show some peace and love. If you're feeling a little bit Ringo and you want to do that, you can do so, as I say, either via Facebook or Twitter. And on that note, that about wraps it up for this episode. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. Hopefully you've taken something from it. I do hope it's both of them. But until we meet again, look after yourself and always keep it dimed out.